Hello! In this video, I'm going to be talking about intros and conclusions for the magnet research paper. So let's go ahead and get started. So an introduction's purpose is to indicate the essay's topic, to maybe describe the pathway of your paper, so the organization of it, explaining the point of writing the essay in the first place, and because first impressions are important. No matter how much we say, don't judge a book by its cover, we absolutely do. So trying to give a good first impression in your intro can be very helpful to the whole purpose of your paper. All right, so I want to start with the Google Earth analogy. This has been one of the most successful strategies that I've ever used with students, and it really helps you kind of like start big picture and then hone into the really detailed thing that you're going to be focusing on in your paper. So think about Google Earth, right? We are going to zoom in. And I want you to think about what we always do when we open up Google Earth for the first time. We are looking at the globe, right, the planet, and then we zoom into North America. And then we zoom into the Midwest, and then to Kansas, and then to Wichita, and then perhaps your neighborhood and maybe even your house, right? So we start really big picture, and then we zoom to something very specific. So this is what a really good introduction can and probably should do. It needs to start with that big picture and then chip away or zoom in until you're to the most important piece of information, which is the thesis statement, which then drives the focus of your entire paper. So think of it as like really big idea, honed into the thesis, and then we're just focusing on that one thing for the rest of the paper. So what about the rest of the introduction, right? That's a great idea, it's a great analogy, but what do I actually do? First, you do need to admit it's impossible to make everybody happy. So we have to just kind of throw a net that's wide enough for the most people. So what can we do as writers that will secure the interest of most people? Okay, maybe not all, but most. So let's start with what not to do on an introduction. We are not going to apologize, so don't ever suggest that you don't know what you're talking about. So examples of this would be like, in my humble opinion, or I'm not sure about this, but don't do those things. The second thing not to do is announce your intentions. In this paper, I will, or the purpose of this essay is to. Don't do those things. You don't need to announce. I know you're writing a paper. You don't need to say, in this essay, or the purpose of. We can be much more direct. One of the things I like to tell students is I can express opinion without saying I think. So, for example, if I say, I think soccer is the best sport, that's opinion. But if I get rid of the I think and just say soccer is the best sport, that's still opinion. So we can still say the things we need to say without saying I, okay? Just keep that in mind. The third thing I don't love is dictionary or encyclopedia definitions. It's just kind of a boring, overused way to start a paper. So like according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, a widget is, it's not interesting. Might be useful later to define a particular thing in your essay, but not at the beginning. So this is an example of a no introduction. And I've highlighted the things that I don't like in it. So the first sentence says, this essay is about. Those are things I don't want to see in an intro. So it says, this essay is about the issue of body checking in junior ice hockey. First, arguments for a ban on body checking are examined. Second, arguments against a ban are discussed. It is shown that pro-ban arguments are stronger than anti-ban arguments. Therefore, the thesis of this essay is that body checking in junior ice hockey should be banned. So up here, it's actually not the hint of the structure. I'm okay with the hint of the structure, but what I don't like is the are examined. It's giving the purpose of this essay is to. That's what it comes off as. So I don't like that. So it would be stronger to say something like there are many arguments for and against body checking, and with one that is a clear winner or something like that. And then the thesis of this essay is also like the purpose of this essay is too, right? So we don't want any of these like very announcy options. We want to be a lot more focused on what we're actually doing here. So what should you do, right? That was the what not to do. So you should start by thinking about questions or the questions that you're trying to answer, the prompt. And hopefully you've been going back to your prompt often as you've been going through this whole process of collecting your research, organizing your research. Hopefully you have. So you know what you need to answer quite clearly. So then you need to decide how general or broad your opening should be. And I recommend writing your introduction last. So you have your body paragraphs mostly finished, and then you go to your introduction and say, okay, now how can I bring in some other person who hasn't done the research that I have done, okay? And don't be afraid to write something tentative that might change later. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Don't be afraid of that. Nothing that we write has to be absolutely set in stone until you hit that final submit button. You also can open with an attention grabber, which I'll talk about here momentarily. And then I also want to stress the attention to your first sentence. Again, first impressions are important. Be straightforward, be confident, and here are some strategies that are helpful. So one would be an intriguing example from your text or one of your texts. It could be a provocative quote, right? Something relatable. It would need to be cited. That is important. It could be a puzzling scenario that maybe ties to your topic in some way. Could be a brief historical review, could be a vivid or unexpected anecdote. That was actually one of my favorite research paper intros I've ever read. Could be a thought-provoking question, although that is also not my favorite. That's why it's lower on this list. Or you could do an analogy or a metaphor, like a comparison to help people make some connections there. So I want to show you an example of a yep introduction, a yes. This is still about hockey here. So it starts with, historically, any sport has had a tendency to be somewhat aggressive and injury-inducing. Basketball, football, and soccer all have their own issues when it comes to injuries. That's a good brief historical review, right? Then it goes more specific. So it started really broad. Here's lots of sports, and we know that sports mean injuries, right? But then it hones in a little bit, and it talks about hockey. So in hockey specifically, body checking has always been a controversial issue. However, the recent decision of Hockey Canada to allow some hockey associations to permit body checking among players as young as 9 years of age on an experimental basis has aggravated the controversy quite considerably in recent months. Okay, it gives me really important context, right? A decision has been made and it has sparked controversy. So then it's going to further focus the paper. Perspectives fall in three main categories: viewpoints of the fans, the official standpoint of Hockey Canada, and positions held by the scientific community. They've just given me the structure of their paper right there. Then, move this real quick, then it has evaluation of the main arguments shows quite clearly that Hockey Canada's decision to allow body checking in some junior games, even on an experimental basis, is a serious mistake. That is very clearly the thesis. It is the opinion of the writer, and that they are going to have to prove by exploring these viewpoints and then explaining why it's still a mistake, okay? So really, really solid intro there. Now, I want to talk really quickly about conclusions as well. So conclusions, revisit it. So if you started really big picture and you honed into the focus of your paper, in the conclusion, you're going to go back out to that big idea. So it's almost like an hourglass shape, okay? So the main idea with the conclusion is that you revisit the big ideas in your intro. So spending time on your intro really does help you write a conclusion a little bit better. So essentially mirror it. If you had this big picture in the intro, you're going to have this big picture revisited in the conclusion. And you can start with your thesis, but do rephrase it. Do not copy and paste your thesis into your conclusion. Restate it, okay? Again, that's the statement that is driving the purpose of your whole essay. You're going to gradually build back to that larger picture. It's that Google Earth analogy in reverse. So I go from my house or my neighborhood back to looking at the globe, okay, metaphorically. So then you want to leave your reader with the so what. Why is this interesting? Why was it worth reading this paper? And what might it show us about humanity as a whole? Okay, so those are the things that we can do with our conclusions. So I want to just very briefly show you on my outline, and you can access this outline at any point, that I do have some examples there. So my topic was about user-generated content, so basically people recording things, taking video and pictures, and then sending it to news outlets. So I started with a hook, and in mine, I did a puzzling scenario. So imagine a tragic natural disaster that few survived, hidden away in some safe place. Now imagine if those people had a video recorder or a camera on them. Pictures and video of an oncoming tsunami or tornado could be posted around the world on various countries' news organizations. Conversely to news, businesses are realizing that pictures, video, and reviews by their consumers can and should be used. So I'm giving some really big idea in like the real world, right? Then I start focusing on some of that background. So this is the phenomenon of, oh, here's my topic of my essay, user-generated content. Mass media and advertisers are realizing that the public they cater to has opinions, information, ways of getting that information to each other. I give a few more examples: the tsunami that hit the Indian Ocean, the September 11 attacks, the plane landing on the Hudson River. And I keep chipping away, right? Chipping away. With the prevalence of the internet in this modern age, journalism is heavily influenced by user-generated content, and it should not be ignored. And then I can get into my thesis. User-generated content can be beneficial commodity to news organizations and companies, but it can hurt those that refuse to use it wisely or at all. So I'm clearly going to be explaining both sides of it and how it can be beneficial and how it can hurt if you don't use it, right? And then I have the rest of my paper. So good luck. Remember, start big picture, chip away until you're focused on your thesis. Focus your whole paper on that topic, and then in your conclusion, go back to that big picture. Best of luck to you.